In the pantheon of American crime, few names cast a darker shadow than Ted Bundy. To the public eye of the 1970s, he was handsome, articulate, and even charming, a law student with a smile that could disarm anyone. But beneath that polished facade lurked a monster. Between 1974 and 1978, Bundy abducted, tortured, and murdered dozens of young women across multiple states, leaving behind a trail of horror that still defines the word serial killer. Yet behind the gruesome headlines and courtroom theatrics lies a quieter, more haunting story, that of a child born into the chaos of Bundy's final years. Her name is Rose Bundy, the daughter of one of history's most infamous killers, a child conceived in captivity under the fluorescent lights of Florida State Prison, while her father awaited execution. How does one live when their very existence is a product of such infamy? What happened to Ted Bundy's daughter after the electric chair fell silent? This is the story of Ted Bundy and Rose Bundy, the murderer who hid behind charm, and the daughter who spent her life escaping his shadow. Theodore Robert Bundy was born on November 24, 1946, in Burlington, Vermont. His origins were steeped in secrecy and shame. His mother, Eleanor Louise Cowell, was unmarried and just 22 years old when she gave birth to him. To hide her pregnancy from conservative society, she fled to a home for unwed mothers and later told relatives that Ted was her younger brother rather than her son. That confusion of identity born of deception would mark Bundy's psychology for life. Bundy grew up in Tacoma, Washington, raised by his maternal grandparents for much of his early childhood. Those years were fractured, filled with rumors that his father was abusive, and that Ted may have witnessed acts of violence at a young age. By the time he learned the truth about his parentage, the damage had already been done. Ted Bundy's charm and control, the masks he would later wear, were forged from the emotional duplicity of his own beginnings. As a teenager, he appeared intelligent, reserved, and ambitious. He studied psychology at the University of Washington and was known for his sharp mind and clean-cut appearance. Yet beneath that surface lay a fascination with manipulation and dominance. He worked briefly at a suicide hotline, where he calmly talked strangers back from the brink of death, even as he himself was sliding into darkness. Bundy's public life seemed picture-perfect. He became involved in politics, volunteered in campaigns, and studied law. But his private life was unraveling. By the early 1970s, he began leading a double existence: the respectable young man admired by peers and the predatory killer who stalked women at night. Decades later, this duality, the loving image versus the hidden violence, would eerily repeat itself in the story of his daughter Rose. Born in captivity, but destined to live in anonymity, she would grow up carrying a name the world could never forget, yet forced to live as if she never existed. By the mid-1970s, Ted Bundy's double life began to fracture under the weight of his own depravity. Between 1974 and 1978, he unleashed a wave of murders across Washington, Oregon, Utah, Colorado, and Florida, each one meticulously planned, each one executed with chilling precision. He abducted young women, often posing as an injured man in need of help, then overpowered and murdered them, sometimes revisiting the bodies long after their deaths. Investigators would later call him a chameleon of evil, a man who could transform from charming to monstrous in the blink of an eye. His crimes left police baffled. Bundy's intelligence allowed him to manipulate the justice system and those around him. He was arrested multiple times, but twice escaped custody, once leaping from a courthouse window in Colorado, and again breaking out of a jail cell by sawing through the ceiling. His second escape led him to Florida, where he committed his most brutal killings: the Chi Omega sorority murders at Florida State University in 1978. 2 young women were beaten to death, and several others were severely injured in a rampage that would finally seal his fate. Bundy's arrest later that year ended one of the most intense manhunts in U.S. history. Yet even behind bars, his control never waned. He turned the courtroom into a stage, representing himself as his own attorney, cross-examining witnesses, and manipulating the media with a disturbing mix of arrogance and charm. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse, some women openly professing their attraction to him. The public fascination with Bundy became its own kind of sickness proof that charisma could mask evil, and that society was as entranced by the killer as horrified by his crimes. It was during this period, his imprisonment and the strange celebrity that followed, that Bundy's personal life took an unexpected turn. Behind the concrete walls of Florida State Prison, amid television cameras and death row interviews, Ted Bundy fell in love. The woman's name was Carol Ann Boone, a former co-worker who believed in his innocence. Their relationship would soon lead to one of the strangest and most controversial chapters in the entire Bundy saga, the birth of a child in prison. When Ted Bundy was sentenced to death in 1979, most believed the story of his life had reached its inevitable conclusion. Yet even on death row, Bundy refused to fade quietly. Behind the locked doors of Florida State Prison, he manipulated the system one final time, not for escape, but for intimacy. His loyal admirer, Carol Ann Boone, had stood by him throughout his trials, testifying on his behalf and proclaiming his innocence to anyone who would listen. During one of Bundy's court appearances, in a bizarre legal stunt, he proposed to her in the middle of testimony. Because Florida law recognized verbal declarations in court as binding, the judge was forced to acknowledge the marriage. Not long after, Carol Ann Boone began visiting Bundy in prison regularly. Rumors swirled about how she managed to become pregnant, but one detail remains consistent in 1982. She gave birth to a daughter named Rose Bundy. She was conceived while Bundy was confined to death row, likely through contraband visits that bypassed prison protocol. To Carol, Rose was a symbol of love and hope in a world that had turned its back on them. To the rest of the world, she was the innocent child of a man condemned as one of America's worst killers. The birth of Rose Bundy sent shockwaves through the media. Newspapers speculated endlessly about her conception and her future. Would she inherit her father's darkness? Would she grow up knowing who he was? Carol Ann Boone, fiercely protective, cut off contact with the outside world and raised her daughter in complete secrecy. When she realized Ted's execution was inevitable, she finally severed ties with him. By 1986, she had stopped visiting altogether. On January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. Outside the prison gates, crowds cheered, chanting and holding signs that read, "Burn, Bundy, burn." For the public, it was closure. But for Carol and Rose, it was the end of a haunting love story and the beginning of a lifetime lived in silence. After Bundy's execution, Carol Ann Boone and her daughter vanished from public view. The woman who had once defended him in court and declared her undying love now cut all ties with his name. For Rose Bundy, barely 7 years old at the time, that disappearance was not a choice. It was a necessity. She became a child born into infamy. Her father's crimes a curse she would spend her entire life escaping. Carol reportedly moved across the country with her daughter, changing names and locations to protect their identities. Some accounts suggest they lived quietly in the Pacific Northwest. Others claim she remarried and raised Rose under a new surname. What is certain is that both mother and daughter erased every public trace of their connection to Ted Bundy. Carol never spoke of him again. She refused interviews, refused book offers, and shunned anyone who tried to revisit that chapter of her life. As for Rose Bundy, she grew up in total anonymity. There are no verified photographs of her as an adult, no public statements, no confirmed sightings. Some reports claim she changed her name and lives as a mother herself. A woman who built a normal life by doing the only thing she could, disappearing. Others believe she learned of her father's true identity only later in life, long after her mother had passed away. The weight of her father's legacy was an invisible inheritance. To the world, Ted Bundy was a monster. To her, he was a name she could never speak. Living under that contradiction required the kind of strength that no child should ever need to possess. By removing herself completely from public life, Rose did what her father never could. She chose control, privacy, and peace over notoriety. In doing so, she became the one Bundy who survived by refusing to let the family name define her. The emotional reckoning for those tied to Ted Bundy came in waves long after his death. For Carol Ann Boone, the woman who had once loved him beyond reason reality, eventually shattered the illusion she had built. In the early years, she had insisted Ted was innocent, that the evidence was fabricated, that the world had judged him unfairly. But as the confessions poured out, in his final days, dozens of murders, countless victims, she could no longer deny the truth. Sources close to her later recalled that she was devastated, humiliated, and deeply conflicted. The man she had defended had deceived her as completely as he had deceived the world. Her final act of defiance against that deception was silence. She withdrew from the public, taking her daughter with her, determined that Rose would never grow up defined by a father she could not remember, and a crime she could never escape. Carol's love had once blinded her. Now, it became her armor. She raised her child not in the shadow of Ted Bundy, but in the light of anonymity, hoping that ignorance would be a kind of freedom. For Rose, the turning point was more subtle but no less profound. She grew up in a society fascinated by the myth of her father, books, films, and documentaries immortalizing his evil. Yet she remained absent from it all. Every retelling of Bundy's life, every dramatization of his crimes, was a reminder of what she had to hide. The act of living privately became her quiet rebellion. If she ever came to terms with who her father was, the world will never know. But perhaps that silence is her message. In a culture that glorifies killers and consumes their stories, Rose's refusal to participate is the strongest statement of all. She is not a daughter of a murderer. She is a woman who chose to vanish to reclaim her narrative by denying the world the spectacle it craved. Her existence, unseen, unspoken, remains the most haunting legacy Ted Bundy ever left behind. As the years passed, the legend of Ted Bundy only grew, yet Rose Bundy managed to remain untouched by it. While her father's name filled books, documentaries, and films, she quietly built a life defined by ordinary things: family, work, privacy. For the public, she became an enigma, a ghostly reminder that evil leaves scars not only on victims, but on those born in its aftermath. For herself, she became something her father never could, invisible by choice. By all available accounts, Rose, believed to have changed her name to one of several aliases, grew into adulthood far removed from crime or notoriety. Some reports claim she studied in the Pacific Northwest and later became a mother, raising her own child in peace. Others suggest she cut ties with nearly everyone who had known her early life. What matters more than the details is the intent she chose to live beyond the reach of curiosity, never granting interviews, never capitalizing on her father's infamy. Her mother, Carol Ann Boone, eventually passed away quietly in 2018, reportedly still living under an assumed identity. By then, Rose was an adult with her own family, a new generation unburdened by Ted Bundy's crimes. In this silence, she found a form of redemption that no public statement could provide. The world has always been fascinated by serial killers, studying them like dark celebrities. But Rose Bundy's life stands as a counterpoint to that obsession. She became proof that identity is not inherited, that blood does not dictate destiny. While her father's face still stares from mugshots and Netflix thumbnails, she has built a legacy of her own, one grounded in invisibility and peace. For those who have spent decades chasing her story, the lesson is simple. The daughter of a killer is not a continuation of his evil, but a testament to what it means to survive it. By disappearing, Rose Bundy didn't just escape her father's shadow. She extinguished it. Ted Bundy's life ended in a blaze of infamy. His face burned into history as the embodiment of charm turned monstrous. Yet the story of his daughter Rose endures in a very different light. A whisper instead of a scream. A life reclaimed from the ashes of horror. While her father's name became a symbol of deceit, violence, and manipulation, hers became synonymous with survival, anonymity, and quiet strength. History remembers Bundy for what he took the lives of women whose only mistake was trusting him. But the existence of Rose Bundy reminds us of what was left behind a child born into a nightmare she did not choose. The irony is profound. Ted Bundy spent his life craving attention control and power over others. But his daughter's greatest triumph has been the complete absence of all three. She has lived as if undoing him, erasing the mythology that once glorified his charm by choosing to live outside of it entirely. In the end, Rose's story offers a kind of moral symmetry to the Bundy saga. Where her father sought domination, she chose peace. Where he created victims, she became proof of resilience. She carries none of his crimes, yet through her silence she delivers the clearest verdict imaginable, one that time, not the courts, would render. Decades after Ted Bundy's execution, people still gather details about his murders, dissecting his psychology, his patterns, his motives. But the more meaningful story may be the one that has never been told, the life of a woman who refused to be part of that narrative. Rose Bundy does not appear in documentaries, nor on talk shows, nor in crime archives, and that is precisely her victory. In the long shadow of one of history's most notorious killers, she did not just survive. She disappeared, rebuilt, and lived. And perhaps in that silence, far from cameras, far from legacy, lies the most human truth of all, that even from evil something innocent can choose its own light.